I'd like to talk to you a little bit about traditional governance. And the place where I've seen the most traditional governance is East Timor, when I was a provincial governor. It was a really enlightening experience. As essential background, depending which village you went to, between 60 and 80% of the population of my province were illiterate. And I learned very quickly, illiterate does not mean stupid. It just means you can't read or write. I compare this experience in East Timor with an experience that I had in Canada as chairman of a land use registration committee, voluntary, for the local planning authority. In Canada, it took us 18 months. There were 15% of the land that we never got classified because of absolutely intransigent and ignorant opposition from certain families, certain interests within the community. And we were commended by the planning authority for having completed more than any of the other municipal district advisory committees. So, in this consulting the ancestors, I have to take you back to the start of the problem, which is way before the problems that caused the birth of East Timor. About 15 years previously, there'd been a terrible flood. The little dam near the village of Fatusene had overflowed, scoured underneath the dam, broken the seal. The dam needed repair, and the province of Akusi went from being a net exporter of rice to being a net importer of rice. Apparently, during the good times, they had been 2.3 harvests of rice a year. What 0.3 of a harvest looks like, please don't ask me, I don't know. And once the dam had broken, there could only be one harvest a year directly affected by the rains. The rains directly flooded the fields. So, my agriculture officer came to me one day and with all this sad story about the dam, how it was broken and how they could go back to being self-sufficient, in fact, probably even exporting some rice if only we rebuilt the dam. And I said to him, so you've identified a problem, you've identified the solution, it all sounds very agricultural, why are you still standing in my office? And he said, well, it's not as easy as that. I thought, no, it never is. And he said, I've been to lots of people, the clan, sub-clan elders, everybody agrees that we need to rebuild the dam, but nobody wants to do it. And I really was intrigued by this. Everybody agrees that it should be done, but nobody wants to do it. So, when I had one of these perplexing anthropological problems, it's not a technical problem at all, it's an anthropological problem, I would go and consult an old missionary priest up in the hills. More of him later. Anyway, I went up into the hills with a 6-pack of Heineken. I gave him the 6-pack and I said, Father Richard, what does this mean? Nobody wants to help me rebuild the dam in Fatusene. And he opens the first beer and the beer hardly touches the side of his throat as it's going down. And he says, no, of course not. You've got to consult the ancestors. And I think about this for a minute. Meanwhile, the second beer, glug, 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 he drinks it. And I said, tell me what does that mean, Father Richard? And he said, well, basically, you have to call a meeting that will consult the ancestors. And it consists of you, the governor, putting on a big feast. I would suggest you do it under the big banyan tree in Tono Market. And at the end of the feast, believe me, the ancestors will speak. They will have spoken. And I just thought, you know, I've been conned by a lot of people in my time, but a priest? Really? So I said, if I get this straight, I've got to pay for a feast to be put on. They've got to come. The ancestors will be consulted, and by the end of it, everybody will be happy. He said, basically, you've got it. It's pretty simple. Next morning, because it was a day up and a day back from the hills, I stomped back down the mountain. I wasn't in the best mood. Arrived at my office just as everybody thought they'd be going for an early afternoon. Slammed the door, called everyone into the bullpen and said, right, 2 weeks' time, consultation of the ancestors, Tono Market under the big banyan tree, start getting it organized. I will pay for 2 huge sacks of rice. And that's an end to all of this foolishness. And so they scuttled off and they got their word out and they did this and they did that. And I went along to the local merchant and I said, I want 2 huge sacks of rice. He said, yeah, I hear you're consulting the ancestors. I said, you better believe it. I'm doing it under the big tree in Tono Market. Book early to avoid disappointment. So this is not actually the consultation, but this picture shows the big banyan tree and it shows a market that's going on there. And so you get the picture of what it was like. There's a huge old tree. There's hundreds of people. But for a consultation of the ancestors, what they did is they put carpets on the ground and they built to one side a special little kitchen. And it wasn't so little, but it was a special extempore kitchen. And there were the older women in the kitchen who were cooking, the younger women who were going to be taking the food to the tables. There were the older men who were going to be on the carpets, and there were no young men of military age. They were all either told to go and find something else to do or just told not to turn up. And that was a very interesting first point. They were not wanting for the male voice. Everybody on a carpet, and there was about 100 of them on 12 or so carpets, was a man. And so I told my interpreter that she'd be working that Saturday. She was really fed up. It's not that she had anything else to do, but she was in her late teens. She knew what this was going to be like. It was going to be a very long gas, jaw sort of affair. And there'd be nothing in it for her. She'd just be working on a Saturday afternoon. So she sulked and pouted and, you know, I put up with it for a bit and maybe I was a little sharp with her a little later. So we take our seats on the carpets. I'm on the head carpet with some very senior guys from various villages. And the food is coming out. The young women are presenting the food. The older women are completely in the kitchen, but you can see they're chatting with each other a lot. On the carpets, people are chatting. So I'm getting my interpreter, who's over my right shoulder, and I'm saying, what are they talking about on that carpet over there? And she's sort of snarky and snarly, says, they're just stupid farmers. They're talking about rice and they're talking about corn. Thank you. And how about this way down in the bottom corner over there? What are they talking about over there? She said, they're farmers. All they talk about is rice and corn. And then, okay, so what are these older guys on my carpet talking about? And she said, these guys own farms and they're talking about rice and corn. And she is just within a millimeter of saying something bad to me, and I'm certainly within a millimeter of saying something bad to her when my epiphany happens. What are they talking about? They're talking about rice and corn. They haven't had the dam for 15 years. There's been one harvest of rice and one harvest of corn each year for 15 years. If we rebuild the dam and go back to 2.3, we completely blow apart the exchange rate between rice and corn. And until they've all talked about the new exchange rate and what it means and how it means and when it can be paid and what can be done, nobody wants to rebuild the dam. Nobody wants to preempt what's going to happen. Now, even more importantly, as I got to understand this, each carpet represented a little tributary of the main stream of the watershed. And they weren't having the same exchange rate in each valley. They were having the exchange rate they wanted. They were fixing the exchange rate to their absolutely local conditions. And that was really exciting. This was a typical view of the kind of carpet. In this case, it's another consultation and it's a ground sheet. But this is the sort of thing we did. We sat around on these carpets. So when they had hammered out an exchange rate, the older women had been sending in advice and threats. You can imagine it. Sending to her husband on carpet number 7, you agree to that, you're sleeping in the shed tonight. Or take that deal with both hands, that's the best we're going to get. The younger women were being trained, both listening to the conversation in the kitchen amongst the older women and listening on the carpets and reporting back to and fro. They were getting the sense that they were going to have to be steering the ship as much as anybody else later as they became part of the accepted older group of women. The only influence that wasn't there was the slightly crazy young men, and you can see why they would just have messed it up, because they were not the ones directing how the family were going to farm that particular land that they had, whether it was upland or lowland that year. It was going to be the older men doing it. They provide the work, but they wouldn't have much of the input. So we end the day with an agreement that they will start work the next day on the dam, and 400 guys turn up to work for $1.60 a day on the dam. And this picture shows a whole bunch of them in the mud at the bottom of the dam. They were absolutely fabulous workers. And in part 2 of this story, I'll tell you exactly how that also worked out, because nothing was ever quite as it seemed in East Timor. So let's just take a quick analysis of what's happening with the Cynefin framework and this particular event. The obvious protocols, rigid protocols, govern legacy issues. In traditional societies, there's a way to do things, and just because it's quicker to do it on TikTok or Instagram, it doesn't mean they want to do it like that. If they've always met and sat on carpets and called it the consultation with the ancestors, that's what you have to do. And by the way, the further background to that was that the ancestors live in the ground. You can't disturb the ground without disturbing the ancestors. The ancestors love their descendants, but they want to look after them and they want to make wise decisions. And so this is why it's called consulting the ancestors. Novel issues, brand new issues, you have to develop new protocols, but they've got to look like the old protocols. And that was why none of them could see past how to get the situation rolling to mend the dam. The public meetings with all stakeholders' voices are known to be expensive and are called inefficient because they're messy. There's always different voices. And this is where the Timorese example is so encouraging to me. It was one river with many tributaries which made basically the watershed. Yet each tributary had its own exchange rate for this particular problem. Same rice, same corn. You couldn't tell from a different tributary one kind of rice from another kind of rice from the rest of the lowlands. So, very, very important to understand that this traditional protocol, although it looks inefficient, it looks messy, is exactly what they want on the ground. And we're here for them, or I was there for them. I wasn't there for myself. And so many development programs refuse to recognize these traditional protocols because they're inefficient. So, that's really all I have to say about part 1. And I'll talk more about what happened when we actually started building the dam in part 2.